You know, what if I told you that a super simple object, maybe, I don't know, the one sitting on your desk right now, actually holds the key to a massive conclusion about the very nature of reality? Well, in this explainer, we're going to follow a really fascinating logical argument that claims to do exactly that.
Okay, so here's our path. We're going to kick things off with just an ordinary cup of coffee and see how it's tied into this huge web of existence. From there, that's going to lead us to a classic philosophical puzzle. It's called the problem of regress, which will pretty much force us to think about something called an unconditioned reality. And then, to wrap it all up, we'll ask, okay, so what is this ultimate reality even like? Let's dive in.
All right, let's get right into it. And we're not starting with some super dense, abstract philosophy. Nope. Our whole investigation starts with something way more familiar. Something you might literally be holding in your hand right this second.
So the argument we're about to unpack, it all begins with just one single object. Seriously, it could be anything. A key, a plant, or, for our example, a simple cup of coffee. And that's what's so cool about this line of thought. It doesn't need to start with the entire universe or some grand concept. All it needs is one everyday thing that we all agree is real.
Okay, so here it is. This is the big question. We're not asking, how the coffee was made or where the beans came from. No, the question is way more immediate. What does it take for this cup to exist right here, right now? Like in this very instant, what conditions have to be in place for it to just be? And you know what? That one simple question, it just blows the whole thing wide open. Suddenly, we're looking at this huge, interconnected web. We realize pretty quickly that for our little cup of coffee to exist, it actually depends on a whole world of other things. I mean, just think about it. For that coffee to be coffee right now, an insane number of conditions all have to be met at the exact same time. You've got the temperature. It has to be just right, or it would instantly boil or freeze. The chemical bonds in the water, H2O, they have to hold together. Gravity has to be a thing, keeping the coffee in the cup, which, oh yeah, depends on the entire mass of the Earth creating that gravitational field. And that's not even mentioning the atoms of the cup itself all staying put.
So philosophers actually have a name for things like our coffee cup. They call them conditioned realities, or just CRs for short. And it's a pretty simple idea, really. A CR is just, well, it's anything that needs other things to be in place for it to exist. It's dependent.
And this is where it gets really interesting. Our coffee cup, it's not special. Turns out everything we can see and touch is a conditioned reality. And get this, each of the conditions that allows our coffee to exist is also a CR, which means it has its own set of conditions. You see where this is going? It creates this massive, branching, ever-expanding network of dependencies.
So, this leads us right to the logical heart of the whole argument. I mean, if everything depends on something else, which depends on something else, what's holding the whole thing up? What's at the bottom of it all?
This question basically puts us at a fork in the road. When you look at this huge web of dependencies, there are really only two ways the universe could be put together.
So let's break down these two possibilities. First, hypothesis 1. Maybe the chain of dependencies is finite. It goes back, 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 and then it just stops with some final conditioned reality. Or there's hypothesis 2. The chain is infinite. It just goes on forever and ever with no beginning and no end. Now, the argument says that if the world is made up only of conditioned things, one of these two scenarios has to be true. Okay, so let's look at hypothesis 1. What if the chain just ends? Well, if that final link is still a conditioned reality, we've got a big problem. I mean, by its very definition, it needs conditions to exist, right? But if it's the very last thing in the chain, there's nothing else to provide those conditions. It can't hold itself up, so it definitely can't be the foundation for everything else. And that really gets to the core of the issue. As the thinking goes, a grounding element that still has conditions to be fulfilled does not exist, and the whole chain collapses into nothing. In other words, a foundation that needs its own foundation, well, that's not a foundation at all, is it? If that last link can't exist, then the one before it can't, and the one before that, and poof, the whole chain just falls apart. But wait, our cup of coffee does exist, so this hypothesis can't be right. All right, so hypothesis 1 is out. What about number 2, the infinite chain? The problem here is actually pretty similar. Imagine an endless line of things, where each one is just potential. Each one is waiting for the next one in line to give it existence. Well, you can wait forever, but that's never going to add up to something that actually exists. It's exactly like adding 0 plus 0 plus 0. You can do it an infinite number of times, but your answer is always going to be 0.
There's a great analogy for this. It goes, it is like saying a brush can paint by itself,
provided it has a long enough handle. I mean, that makes perfect sense, right? A paintbrush can't paint on its own no matter how crazy long the handle is. The handle is just a connector to the painter, the one who's actually doing the painting. An infinite chain of dependencies, that's just like an infinitely long handle with no painter at the end.
Or here's another one that really hits home. You can go from coach car to coach car, but at some point you need to find a locomotive if it is moving. You could have a train that's 1,000,000 miles long, but if it's actually moving, there has to be an engine somewhere up front pulling the whole thing. The cars themselves don't have the power. It's the same idea. An infinite series of dependent things just can't be the ultimate source of their own existence.
Okay, so let's recap. A finite chain of dependent things doesn't work. An infinite chain of dependent things also doesn't work. Logically, the argument is now forcing us to look at a third option, one we kind of ignored at the start.
So, what this means is we've basically ruled out a universe made up only of conditioned realities. That initial assumption we made, it has to be wrong, which means there must be something else.
And that something else is what this argument calls an unconditioned reality, or a UR for short. And this is a whole different kind of being. It's a reality that is totally self-sufficient. It doesn't need anything else to exist. There's no checklist of conditions that have to be met. It just is. It's the painter holding the brush. It's the locomotive pulling the train.
But okay, the argument doesn't just stop there and say, hey, this thing exists. The next logical step is to ask, well, what must this unconditioned reality be like? What can we figure out about its basic nature just by using logic?
Okay, so first, it has to be simple. Now, in philosophy, simple doesn't mean easy to understand. It means it's not made of different parts and has the fewest possible boundaries. A good way to think about it is like this. An electromagnetic field is considered simpler than a proton or an electron. Why? Because the field itself is more fundamental. It contains the potential for both of them. It's more inclusive. So in this context, the ultimate simplicity means being the ultimate source of everything.
So building on that idea, this unconditioned reality has to be the absolute simplest thing there is, because its job is to be the foundation for everything else, right? Philosophers have this term for it. They call it pure act. It basically means it's the ultimate doer, the source of all action that makes everything else real. And if it has no parts, no divisions, and no boundaries, well, that means it must also be infinite.
And here's the final piece of the puzzle. There can only be one. Just think about it for a second. Let's say there were two of these infinite, unconditioned realities. How would you tell them apart? There'd have to be some quality that one has and the other one doesn't. But the moment you add a quality or take one away, you've created a limit, a boundary, a condition. And that completely contradicts what an unconditioned reality is. So logically, there can only be one.
So, there you have it. We literally just followed a logical path that started with an ordinary cup of coffee and ended at the necessary existence of a single, simple, infinite, and unconditioned source for everything that exists. It's a pretty powerful line of reasoning, and it leaves us with a really profound thought to chew on about the ultimate foundation of our entire reality.